It was supposed to be over in days. Flags raised, cameras rolling, history edited in real time. But the silence stretched, the ground resisted, and the clock kept counting bodies instead of victories. At dawn, the engines roared with certainty. Columns moved like a promise carved in steel. This was meant to be dominance on schedule, precision wrapped in spectacle, an operation so fast it would erase doubt before doubt could form. The plan was clean. The timeline was ruthless. The confidence was absolute. And that was the first crack. Because war doesn't care about confidence. It listens only to friction. The first weeks were sold as momentum, but momentum bleeds when it outruns reality. Roads became traps. Cities refused to collapse on cue. Every kilometer demanded a price that wasn't on the spreadsheet. What was meant to be a shockwave turned into a slow grind, and every delay multiplied the cost. The illusion of control began to slip, not with a dramatic collapse, but with thousands of small failures stacking quietly, invisibly, until the weight became undeniable. This wasn't the war that was promised. It wasn't clean and it wasn't fast. It was attrition, brutal, mathematical, indifferent. A war measured not by banners raised but by months survived. A war where progress wasn't captured in maps but in how many men could still be sent forward tomorrow. The strategy assumed mass would overwhelm resistance. Instead, mass became the vulnerability. Each assault followed the same rhythm. Push forward, absorb losses, replace them, repeat. The machine kept moving because stopping would admit miscalculation. And miscalculation, at the highest levels, is more dangerous than defeat. So the answer to failure became more force, more bodies, more steel, more noise, as if volume alone could bend reality. But reality had shifted. What began as a display of strength quietly transformed into a test of endurance, and endurance is a different battlefield. In this arena, speed matters less than sustainability. Precision matters more than presence. And strategy punishes arrogance faster than any enemy ever could. Month after month, the numbers climbed, not as anomalies but as patterns. Losses that were supposed to shock the opponent instead hollowed out the attacker. This is where the war changed without anyone announcing it. Because attrition doesn't explode. It erodes. It eats leadership decisions alive. It turns timelines into liabilities. It exposes assumptions that were never stress-tested. The idea that resistance would fold. The belief that morale could be manufactured. The gamble that fear would travel faster than resolve. Every one of those assumptions met a wall and kept running into it. There's a moment in every campaign when force stops being a solution and starts becoming a confession. A confession that the plan didn't account for adaptation. That it underestimated will. That it confused intimidation with inevitability. When that moment arrives, leaders face a choice. Recalibrate or double down. History shows how often pride chooses the second option. So the pressure increased. The attacks grew heavier. The tempo accelerated. Not because it worked, but because stopping would expose the truth. And the truth was simple and unforgiving. This war was no longer about winning quickly. It was about not losing visibly. About sustaining the image of control even as control slipped through blood-soaked fingers. Attrition turned into a mirror. Every loss reflected a deeper flaw. Logistics stretched thin. Command structures overloaded. Units rotated faster than they could recover. Experience drained out faster than it could be replaced. And yet the machine kept demanding fuel. Human fuel. Because the system had been built on the assumption that supply was infinite. But infinity is a myth. There's a philosophical trap in overwhelming force. It convinces its architects that mass can substitute for thought, that repetition can replace innovation, that pressure alone can break anything given enough time. But war isn't a wall, it's a mind. And minds adapt, faster than doctrines, faster than rigid hierarchies, faster than leaders willing to admit error. This is the paradox of attrition. The side that relies on it believes time is an ally, right up until time becomes the enemy. Every month without decisive progress tightens the noose. Every failed push narrows the options. Every casualty deepens the gap between the story being told and the reality being lived. The invasion that was meant to prove strength ended up revealing fragility. Not in weapons, but in thinking. Not in courage, but in imagination. It showed what happens when foresight loses to momentum, when force outruns strategy, when mass is deployed without a plan for adaptation. The battlefield didn't just resist, it taught. And the lesson was unforgiving. Dominance without precision is noise. Power without flexibility is decay. Strategy that cannot change becomes a liability the moment reality pushes back. The war didn't end when it was supposed to. It evolved. It hardened. It turned into something far more dangerous than a failed blitz. It became a long test of limits, human, economic, political. A test no one had prepared for because no one believed it would be necessary. And that leaves one question hanging in the air, unanswered and uncomfortable. When a war designed to end fast becomes a slow collapse instead, who realizes it first? The soldiers on the ground, or the leaders who can no longer afford to admit they were wrong? It was 3:42 a.m. when the sky blinked back, silent, mechanical, watching, while a convoy below kept moving, unaware that the battlefield had already decided its fate. This war stopped being loud first. The artillery still thundered, the engines still growled, but the real violence arrived quietly, through lenses, signals, and algorithms that never slept. Ukraine learned early that matching force with force was a losing equation. Steel against steel favors the heavier hand. So the hand changed shape. The escalation wasn't announced. It unfolded. Small drones replaced grand formations. Precision replaced presence. A single operator, hunched in darkness, suddenly mattered more than an entire column on the road. The battlefield compressed. Distance collapsed. Every movement created a signature, and every signature could be tracked, tagged, confirmed. War became a live feed. At first, it felt improvised. Commercial drones, modified frames, makeshift payloads. But improvisation evolves fast when survival demands it. What looked chaotic from the outside was becoming systematic inside. Surveillance layered over surveillance. Eyes above eyes. Targets didn't disappear, they accumulated data. Routes, timings, habits, patterns. The algorithm learned faster than armor could adapt. This is where the core mechanism snapped into place. A drone spots, another confirms, a third records. Nothing counts unless it's seen twice, sometimes 3 times. No noise, no speeches, just confirmation. Precision as doctrine, proof as currency. The battlefield stopped being a rumor and turned into an archive. Every strike cataloged, every loss measured, every mistake replayed. And then came the turning point, the moment technology stopped being a tool and became a multiplier. Ukraine didn't just deploy drones. It organized them, incentivized them, turned destruction into a feedback loop. Operators weren't guessing anymore. They were competing. Points for hits. Rewards for confirmed results. A leaderboard replacing medals. The battlefield turned into a system where motivation, technology, and confirmation fused into one engine. This wasn't chaos. It was design. One drone costs a fraction. One tank costs millions. One operator sits safely miles away. One armored vehicle burns in seconds. The comparison is brutal. Dollars versus lives. Circuits versus flesh. Strategy versus mass. Every exchange favored the side that thought faster, not harder. Russian forces kept moving as if visibility still meant safety, as if scale still meant dominance, as if the sky belonged to no one. But the sky had already been claimed, quietly, cheaply, relentlessly. Every advance triggered a response. Every pause became exposure. Every regrouping created a cluster, and clusters attract attention. The casualties didn't arrive in waves. They arrived steadily, month after month. Not rumors, not estimates. Verified, time-stamped, recorded from above. Tens of thousands erased not by a single catastrophic blow, but by thousands of precise cuts. Death by a system that never blinked. This is the paradox of modern warfare. The smallest tools can impose the largest costs. A drone doesn't intimidate, calculates. It doesn't rage. It waits. It doesn't miss often, and when it does, it learns. Every failure sharpens the next strike. Every engagement refines the process. Here's the philosophical fracture. Mass assumes obedience. Technology rewards adaptation. One demands endless supply. The other demands insight. Ukraine didn't try to overwhelm. It tried to outthink. It didn't chase spectacle. It chased efficiency. In doing so, it flipped the entire logic of attrition on its head. Attrition was supposed to favor the side with more bodies. Instead, it favored the side that made bodies expensive. The battlefield became a place where hesitation was lethal and routine was fatal. Where old tactics became decoys for new systems. Where command structures lagged behind real-time feeds. Where reaction time mattered more than bravery. 10 seconds late wasn't unfortunate, it was terminal. And the most unsettling part? The machine doesn't tire. Operators rotate. Batteries recharge. Data accumulates. The system grows smarter while the target pool shrinks. Every confirmed strike tightens the loop. Every month increases the pressure. Every success encourages the next iteration. This isn't just warfare. It's momentum encoded. What began as adaptation hardened into dominance. Quiet dominance. Uncelebrated dominance. The kind that doesn't parade but persists. The kind that bleeds an opponent without announcing it. The kind that forces questions no general wants to answer. How do you fight an enemy that sees everything? How do you intimidate a system that feels nothing? How do you win when every move teaches your opponent how to kill you faster next time? Ukraine didn't invent the future of war. It accelerated it. And acceleration doesn't ask permission. It just arrives, then waits for the slow to catch up or disappear. But here's the unresolved tension, the one that hangs heavy in the air. When technology turns warfare into an algorithm, when killing becomes optimized rather than emotional, where does this road lead next? And who will still be standing when the system demands its next evolution? It was a gray morning with no sunrise worth remembering, just a whistle, a shove forward, and a line of men stepping into fire as if the ground itself had already decided they wouldn't be coming back. This is where numbers stop being statistics and start being policy. At the heart of Russia's mounting losses isn't a weapon failure or a single bad decision. It's a culture, a way of thinking that reduces human beings into inventory. A system where bodies are counted the same way ammunition is counted, used, replaced, reordered. The war didn't turn brutal by accident. It was designed that way. The escalation followed an old script. When resistance holds, send more men. When losses spike, widen the front. When a position fails, try again, louder, heavier, bloodier. Overwhelming numbers were supposed to crush opposition through sheer pressure. A shockwave of mass. Dominance through exhaustion. But repetition without adaptation isn't strength. It's erosion. Assaults came in waves. Not because the first wave worked, but because the second was already waiting. And the third. And the fourth. Each one stepping over the last. Each one buying meters of ground with lives measured in dozens. Then hundreds. The math was cold and deliberate. How many lives for how much land? How much loss is acceptable to avoid admitting failure? This is the core mechanism of expendability. Recruits arrive with contracts and promises. Quick money. Short deployments. Safe roles. Then the reality ruptures. They're pushed forward into zones already mapped by enemy fire. Little training. Less support. Minimal extraction. Survival becomes optional. Orders don't ask if a position can be taken. They ask if enough men are left to try again. And when those men fall, replacements appear. Not from centers of power. Not from elite districts. But from the margins. Poor regions. Isolated towns. Minority communities. Places where opportunity is scarce and the uniform feels like an escape. The system feeds on disparity. Those with the least to lose are sent first. Those with voices loud enough to be heard are kept far away. This isn't chaos. It's selection. The turning point isn't when losses peak. It's when losses become normalized. When death stops being reported as tragedy and starts being discussed as throughput. When commanders plan assaults knowing most won't return, and proceed anyway. That's when a military stops being a shield and becomes a grinder. Here's the philosophical fracture line. Strategy is supposed to preserve force, not consume it. Leadership is supposed to convert lives into advantage, not waste them for optics. But when authority is allergic to retreat, when hierarchy punishes honesty, and when success is defined by movement instead of sustainability, expendability becomes doctrine. Soldiers aren't trained to think. They're trained to advance. The result is a loop. Failed assault. Heavy losses. Minimal gains. Repeat. The map changes slightly. The graveyards grow massively. And every repetition deepens the belief that survival isn't the goal, obedience is. Courage is redefined as compliance. Refusal becomes treason. And silence becomes policy. What's striking isn't just the scale of loss. It's the indifference to it. In this system, a dead soldier isn't a name. It's proof that pressure was applied. A wounded one is an inconvenience. A survivor is a resource to be redeployed. The individual disappears entirely. Only the mass matters. Only the image of momentum. Only the illusion that force alone will eventually bend reality. But reality keeps receipts. Every unnecessary death drains experience. Every lost veteran widens the gap between command and competence. Every reckless push shortens the lifespan of the force itself. Attrition doesn't just kill soldiers. Kills adaptability. Kills trust. It kills the future of the army it's supposed to empower. And yet the machine keeps moving because stopping would mean asking the forbidden question. What if this strategy is wrong? That question is more dangerous to leadership than any enemy drone. Because the moment expendability is acknowledged, responsibility follows. And responsibility demands change. So instead, the narrative hardens. Losses are framed as sacrifice. Failure is reframed as resilience. The dead are honored just enough to justify the next wave being sent in their place. This is the paradox of overwhelming force. The more you rely on it, the less you can afford to rethink it. The system becomes trapped by its own brutality. The cost of change becomes higher than the cost of loss, at least on paper. But wars aren't won on paper. They're won by cohesion, learning, and foresight. By preserving skilled people long enough to outthink the opponent. When soldiers are treated as disposable, those qualities collapse. What remains is noise, motion without meaning, blood without progress. And that leaves an unsettling question hanging in the air, unanswered and unresolved. When a military is built on the assumption that lives are cheap, what happens when the supply of expendable people finally runs out? And who pays the price when the grinder has nothing left to feed on? It was day 600 and something when the map barely moved, yet the casualty lists kept growing, and the silence after each assault felt heavier than the artillery that came before it. This is the moment wars quietly confess their limits. For all the noise, all the firepower, all the lives burned in forward motion, the ground gained remained thin, fragile, almost embarrassing. A village here, a road there, measured not in breakthroughs but in fractions. When you stack the cost beside the result, the comparison becomes brutal. Thousands spent for meters earned. Weeks consumed for lines that shift and then snap back. Dominance promised. Stalemate delivered. The escalation kept pretending this was momentum. Push harder, they said. Apply pressure. The theory was old and familiar, endurance wins. Endless manpower grinds resistance down until it breaks. Attrition as inevitability. But attrition has a hidden clause. It only works if the supply never falters. And supplies always falter. Because every assault consumes more than men. Consumes money, equipment, morale. Time. And time, once lost, never comes back improved. Each month of minimal gain exposes the imbalance. The war begins to look less like conquest and more like hemorrhage. This is where the core mechanism strains. Recruitment stops flowing naturally. The easy volunteers are gone. The patriotic surge fades. So the system adapts, not with inspiration but with deception. Contracts are rewritten. Risks are minimized on paper. Support roles quietly turn into frontline deployments. Foreign fighters are brought in, promised opportunity, purpose, protection. They arrive to find chaos, language barriers, and missions no one else wants. The incentives shrink. The bonuses that once dazzled now barely distract. Numbers drop from life-changing to symbolic. The comparison becomes cruel. Risk everything for less than what the system once offered to survive. And still, the grinder demands input. This is the turning point, and it's economic before it's military. War doesn't collapse when bullets run out. Collapses when belief does. When recruits start asking questions. When families hesitate. When regions push back. When money stops masking the danger. When manpower, once endless, starts requiring persuasion instead of pressure. And persuasion is expensive. Every deception costs trust. Every foreign recruit costs logistics. Every shrinking incentive reveals weakness. The image of infinite reserves fractures under scrutiny. Because infinite only works until replacement becomes harder than loss. Here's the philosophical reversal. Force is loud, but sustainability is quiet. You can overpower an enemy briefly. You can intimidate. You can flood the battlefield. But if the gains don't justify the cost, the strategy begins to cannibalize itself. The same manpower that once looked like an advantage becomes a liability when it must be fed, paid, equipped, and replaced faster than it can learn. The map tells the truth leadership won't say out loud. Tiny gains, massive losses, a widening gap between sacrifice and result. Each advance stretches supply lines thinner. Each delay compounds expense. Each failed push deepens the dependency on tactics that no longer scale. And still, the system doubles down. Because admitting limits would mean admitting miscalculation. It would mean acknowledging that endurance alone cannot solve a problem designed to punish endurance. That strategy without foresight becomes waste. That mass without meaning dissolves into noise. The battlefield becomes a mirror, reflecting not strength, but constraint. Foreign fighters rotate through faster than cohesion can form. Training lags, coordination frays. The machine keeps moving, but the efficiency drops. Every month costs more and delivers less. That's the definition of unsustainable. This is where the paradigm shift becomes unavoidable. The greatest tactic, endless manpower, turns into the greatest weakness. Not because people stop existing, but because people stop believing the trade is worth it. When loss outpaces purpose, when risk outgrows reward, when territory gained can't justify graves filled, the math collapses. War stops being about victory and starts being about survival of the strategy itself. Attrition was supposed to exhaust the opponent. Instead, it exposes the attacker's ceiling. Economic strain tightens. Recruitment narrows. Deception escalates. And every one of those signals points to the same conclusion. This approach can't continue forever. Time, once an ally, becomes a countdown. 10 seconds left to decide. Do you push again and pay more for less? Or do you stop and face what stopping admits? Most systems choose the first because momentum feels safer than reflection. But momentum doesn't care who it carries off the cliff. And that leaves one unresolved question hovering over everything that comes next. When a war built on endurance finally runs out of endurance, what breaks first? The battlefield, the economy, or the illusion that endless force can replace strategy forever?